My name is Adrian Nantchev, and this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. So that is why I started this podcast, Become Remarkable, to find people from all over the world, whether entrepreneurs or not, and to talk about and share their experiences, their life, their story, and who they are. Today I have with me a returning guest, actually, from a few episodes ago. I can't quite remember what episode it is. I think in the late teens. But Tom Luongo. So please, Tom, why is it you're doing what you're doing? What is your story?
Oh, good morning, Adrian, and thank you for having me back. So why I do what I do I'm gonna go hit the Wayback Machine. There was an article years ago on LouRockwell.com by the great Gary North called "The Top Layer of the Cake." This is going to take a little bit to set up, and I'll try and. But this article had a huge effect on me. Is that they said that Gary North said that his dad said to him that life is like a 3-layer cake. It's kind of the Forrest Gump thing. And as a man goes through his stages of his life, there's 3 main stages to his life where he's focused on himself primarily as a child, and then he's focused on his children as he becomes a father. But then once he hits the last stage of his life, he's worried about his legacy. He's worried about what's he going to leave behind, not just his children, obviously, but what are people going to remember you for? And are you going to have lived a life of significance in a way that matters and that will matter to people, and who will basically show up at your funeral? And that hit me really hard, my mid-30s or so. And it really galvanized a lot of my thinking as to how was I going to structure my life for myself and my family, that I could live in a way that I felt was free from hypocrisy, and being a radical anarcho-capitalist. And I said I needed to figure out a way to divest myself from the state as much as possible, and then become the best communicator of these ideas that I could possibly be in order to show people how to do the same thing. And so that meant, interestingly enough, that meant building my own house, as we went over in the last episode, building my own house in 2002 with my wife and my friends, positioning myself and investing in gold and silver during the last bull market in order to preserve my wealth as much as possible while we waited for what I thought was going to be the big crash in 2008. Turns out it's going to be the next one's going to be in 2018. Just all of these things. And at some point, we always thought that we would, buy a piece of property, build a house on it, and then start building a farm effectively in a place that could be a refuge for my friends and family if there was ever a societal breakdown, which it turns out that hasn't been so far. Okay, that was a little paranoid, maybe a little over the top, but regardless, I never went so far as to say, well, I've got to stock 4 years worth of water, and I need to have a running stream, and a cupola with a 50 caliber machine gun on top of my house or anything like that. Just simply put, what can you do to structure your life in such a way that you do not need the things about modern society that tick you off, for lack of a better term, and those things being, in my mind, being now primarily an economist, divesting myself from the need for U.S. dollars as much as possible, because the dollar is, effectively it's an instrument of debt slavery, and I have no use for that. So by building my own house, I kept my mortgage on a piece of property to a very small amount. By investing in gold and silver, I put my savings, my accumulated capital, in something that cannot be ripped away from me via counterparty risk, which we can get into at a different time. But there's all of these things, and then of course growing your own food. And this is what we talked about in the last episode, was that I decided from a very we would run goats on the property. My wife likes to garden, so she would grow all manner of heritage breed vegetables and potatoes, corn. We'd have fruit. We put in fruit trees, and we'd run chickens. We ran chickens first, and now we run ducks and all of that. And that in and of itself creates 2 distinct advantages. One, all of my life is tax deductible. like my entire life is tax deductible, except, and that includes, part of my writing lifestyle. And then two, I grow a significant portion of my own food for very little money. And so that puts us in a great place to live, to maintain our middle class lifestyle without having to ever chase up the curve of the ever spiraling inflation curve, which is hitting, which no matter what they talk about in terms of headline GDP or headline inflation, commodity inflation, the things that matter, the things that we all use on a regular basis here in the United States, all those things are rising at 12 to 15% a year.
Yeah, definitely, and because of that, we have shrinkflation, where the products stay the same price,
Yes. Right.
but the volume or the grams, the weight is considerably less.
Right, and the Fed and all of the headline what do you call all the headline CPI numbers are heuristically normalized for that. They only look at things from a per package basis, not a per weight basis or a per ounce basis, and it's purely disingenuous. And it's done in the United States. It's done for very cynical political reasons, and that is that Social Security and Medicare are indexed to inflation, to the headline inflation rate, and the payouts are. So they have to try and keep that number as low as possible in order to try and keep the unfunded liability against both those entitlement programs to a minimum.
I never knew.
Absolutely. That's why they do it.
I was watching a video recently about someone in San Diego asking people whether on the streets if they knew what inflation was. The younger generation didn't. The older generation did. They said they remember things back in the 1950s where a gallon of gas was like 25 cents.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people don't know about it, and a lot of people are unaware.
And don't kid yourself. That's part of the plan. Okay, part of the plan of having this kind of controlled inflation through the issuance of debt-based currency is to continually inflate prices so that there's a generational disconnect between parents and children, grandparents and children. So that, I remember as a kid, 25 cents a gallon gasoline. I also remember my grandfather looking at me and going, why are you spending $4 to go or $3 to go to the movies? Movies used to cost a nickel. And he could not understand. He couldn't have any frame of reference. I ran into these problems with my mom, for example, having had, she and my dad both worked at the same job for years. My dad was a police officer. She was a nurse, and she didn't have to move from job to job. My generation was the first one that really saw the United States where you weren't going to have a pension. You weren't going to have any kind of retirement. You were going to have to take care of it yourself. You were going to move jobs from every 4 or 5 years. And if you didn't keep up with your skill set, then, you could find yourself with large periods of unemployment, which I've been through. And so to her, it's just like, well, why wouldn't you just go out and get a job? I'm like, okay. Where? How? Do you understand that I could go out and get a job, say, as a professional chemist working in some industrial shithole in New Jersey? I have to uproot my family from my home. I have to sell my home at a loss. I have to move up there, buy a house 3 times as expensive to not make any money. And I remember her looking at me going, well, Thomas, if everybody had that attitude, nobody would do anything. I'm like, well, if everybody actually went through the net present value calculation, to invoke MBA speak, of their lives, there would be a pitchfork revolt against all of this, because people don't realize the hidden costs of all of it, and they just are kept on a treadmill of worrying about what are we going to do for our children and our families right now, and kept in a constant state of anxiety, while the banking class and the monetary system, skims off that 1% that you are honestly, that's all you actually make in real terms every year. I mean, truth be told, real economic growth, when you strip out everything, is somewhere between 1% and 2%. And for most of human history, up until about the early 1820s or so, again, invoking Gary North, for human wealth compounded about 1% a year. Right around the early 19th century, that started to move up to closer to 2% a year, and that was also when we started moving towards a codification of the banking class as the issuers of currency, because they wanted that extra 1%. They wanted that extra wealth. Now, why that happened, that's a good question that nobody's really been able to satisfactorily answer. My answer off the top of my head is a mixture of the discovery of oil as an energy source and the codification of individual rights in modern Western democracies or modern Western republics, and a much firmer, secure property rights. The catastrophic interaction between those two things is probably what caused that tremendous upsurge in growth. But that growth rate really only lasted for about 80 years under the international gold standard up until 1913 and what effectively is the Second American Civil War, which is when the Fed took over, where the Fed was instituted, the 16th Amendment was passed, direct election of senators was, the income tax came in, direct election of senators. Really, 1913 would be considered in libertarian parlance, it's considered the Second Civil War.
You mentioned 2018 earlier, the crash. You said
yes.
that. What can you say about that?
Oh, I can talk about that we could talk about that for an hour. But let's just, in very broad terms, y'all in Britain are doing the right thing, leaving the European Union. Whether you agree with that or not, from a macroeconomist perspective, y'all are doing exactly the right thing. The European Union is fundamentally built on a flawed monetary system that is going to fail, and it's based on the ability for every member country of the euro to issue debt in the euro terms without it going through the ECB, and they all have different credit qualities, and they all have different labor comparative advantages and everything else, and because of that, the euro is being pushed and being pulled apart by these competing forces within the eurozone, and that bill is coming due, and the only thing that the European Central Bank can do right now is to continue to buy up toxic sovereign debt from Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, you name it. Eventually, they're going to start buying German debt. They have bought German debt. What am I saying? Having pushed interest rates negative and having now pushed over $8 trillion worth of debt worldwide into negative yields. This is not a recipe that is sustainable. Sovereign debt is the bubble, not the American stock market. The American stock market is high. Valuations are historically high, but that's nothing compared to the valuations on most sovereign debt around the world, including U.S. debt. But because the U.S. markets are so big and so much of the debt is denominated in dollars around the world, a lot of emerging market debt like Brazilian, Indonesian, Malaysian debt around the world is denominated in dollars. When the crash in Europe starts and capital begins to flee Europe, and we have to have a new political system, and the EU, as we currently know it, ceases to be, meaning more countries will leave. The Eurozone will shrink. I fully expect the Visegrad Four to leave and a new kind of Austro-Hungarian empire to arise as a buffer zone between Russia and Germany. We can see that happening now with how hard Poland and Hungary are resisting the refugee quotas, and how badly Poland doesn't want Germany to control natural gas distribution from Russia through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Right. These are very important things, very important big picture things that are happening. We're most likely looking at about 6 or 8 months. If we continue to have political unrest in the U.S., we're going to have a weaker dollar surrounding Donald Trump's presidency, which they are fomenting, which the U.S. permanent political class is fomenting tremendous uncertainty surrounding Donald Trump's presidency, which is pushing the dollar down. That's pushing the euro up. The eurozone can't handle a stronger euro, much stronger than it currently is. Italian banks will not be able to service their debt. Portuguese banks will not be able to service their debt. The Italian government will fail, and it just will fail to pay its debts. So when that begins to happen, you can imagine how bad it is now at $1.17. Imagine if the euro's at $1.28 in 6 months. That's going to be the precipitation of a sovereign debt crisis like we haven't seen since the 1930s. That's how bad the situation is. That's going to cause massive capital flight out of Europe. That's all going to rush into the United States, which is going to send the euro down, the dollar up, massive political, and we should wind up with massive political upheaval in Europe. Things look calm now because it looks like Angela Merkel's going to win re-election in Germany. But if there's a downside surprise and the German elections next month, you know, they got past the French elections, and they got past the Dutch elections, but we still have the Catalonian independence vote in a month or a month and a half, and German elections a week before that, and there's all sorts of things that are still that are happening. And then Germany is suing Poland for not taking refugees, and there's so many things happening to pull the European Union apart from a political perspective that the flawed monetary union is causing a lot of this internal political strife. And then the leadership is doubling down on failed policies, and it's going to precipitate a crisis. And when it happens, it's going to be 10 times bigger than Lehman Brothers, and it's going to break the world monetary system.
Yeah, with regards to Catalonia, I was wondering when that was kicking off. And like with the German election, it feels like these things are always the next month, the next year, and you just forget about them. Catalonia,
right.
And I believe also Venice as well. They wanted independence as well in northern Italy. And
yes,
Flanders in Belgium, I believe, want sort of rumblings of independence there as well, and probably loads of other places as well.
Yeah, there are.
You also mentioned earlier a weaker dollar in some retrospect.
We have the weak dollar right now. We're gonna go through when the euro starts to fail, capital is going to flee into the dollar, and then because everybody needs dollars to service all of this dollar-denominated debt around the world. Let me just put it this way. You know that things are bad when you see maybe it's time to invest in emerging markets and Newsweek on the cover of Newsweek and Time. That's usually your sell signal. Okay, it's almost always. And when Goldman Sachs is telling you, hey, you should be looking at emerging markets right now because America is going to die, Goldman's buying the U.S. like you wouldn't believe. They're selling emerging markets and they're buying gold. You do exactly the opposite of whatever Goldman tells you to do. So if Goldman's bullish on oil, sell oil. It's easy because they really are. Goldman really is evil. I'm like, it's not that hard. But especially in a macro sense, there's and that as a bit of macro investing advice, I would absolutely that's a pretty good rule. As back tested, that rule is probably good 75% of the time.
Yeah, I've heard that whatever the government tells you to do the opposite as well.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
And also, I remember on some television interview years ago, perhaps 3 or 4 years ago, there was some Goldman Sachs employee on the television saying that Goldman Sachs owns the world.
No, that's really not too far from the truth, to be honest with you. They certainly have a controlling interest now in the White House as well. And it's one of the things that's bothered me about the Trump presidency and about his cabinet picks, that Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin are so prominent. Gary Cohn is I have zero use for Gary Cohn. I could, it would be great if that guy fell off the back of a turnip truck and never woke up again. So. But it's just this is the U.S. deep state is a very, very powerful thing, and there's no easy way to get rid of it. It's going to take a long time for its tentacles to be those tendrils to be cut. It's just going to be a long time. I've always, when I've talked about this stuff in the past, I always just say, look, it's a big plate of spaghetti, and you have to unravel it, one strand at a time without breaking anything. And it's not easy to do, and it's like a big Jenga board. It's like a big Jenga tower, and if you do it, and if you're not careful, you'll upset the entire apple cart, and you could do a lot of harm. And I know that Trump doesn't want to do that. I'm not a fan of everything he's done, but I look at Trump, and I look at people like Marine Le Pen, and I look at people like Nigel Farage. They understand the fundamental problem that these people that they're fighting against want to create an undemocratic global superstate that ignores sovereign boundaries. And that we can still have sovereignty in nominal terms. We still can have elections, but the elections won't mean anything. That's what they're trying to create in the United. That's what they're trying to create in the United States through illegal immigration into traditional red states in order to flip the electoral college permanently blue in places like my state, Florida, Texas, Arizona, and whatnot. Because once they have that, then they'll never lose another presidential election, and then they can control who becomes who the two candidates are from the two main parties. The election laws are all written to keep third parties out, and that's that. But the problem with that is if you continue to play that game, at some point, you can't have a cultural revolution if the peasants have guns, and the United States has a lot of guns, and and their current push right now is through these groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and others, and you're seeing it in Europe as well, to create and foment political chaos, in order to try and ratchet up fear, and it's not going to work because too many people are red pilled. Too many people are awake at this point. There's been too many people, I'm not going to take I don't take a lot of credit for this, but there's too many people who like me and who have much bigger voices than me who have been able to explain what the reality is for so long that there is a critical mass of people who will not take this. And, I said, Ross, read something the other day that it was the American Revolution was 3% of the population. Really, that was the hardcore revolters. That's all it takes. Well, by the same token, it only takes 3% of radical leftist Marxists to foment the Civil War as well. But I got news for you. There's more like 16 to 20% of the people of this country that are willing to pick up guns and shoot them all. And like it or not, I don't like to talk in these terms. I live in I try to live this pacifist a life as possible. All I'm doing is analyzing what I see, right? And that's part of the reason why we have the farm where we have it. It's why we live the life we do, because I do fundamentally believe in a voluntary society and a peaceful society. But unfortunately, we're going to live through one of the most violent periods of our history and of our lifetimes. It's just the way things are. People are losing their minds over the simplest things, and it's scary. And they're being egged on by their masters in government.
Yeah, I've heard that when it comes to elections, they're selected, not elected.
Yes.
So do you think?
But even yeah. Well, Jean-Claude Juncker said there can be no democratic decisions against the European treaties. He said this flat out. This was in response to this was in upcoming. He said it, in terms of Greece, right? Greece, selecting Syriza to leave the EU back in 2014. But it applies to everything. It applies to Brexit. It applies to everything. They don't. They're unelected. These people. They just act, and they just dictate from above through a plutocracy and an oligarchy.
So, with regards to Donald's presidency and the deep state, do you think it's a case that the deep state has enveloped him, or do you think that now that Donald actually is president, it's a lot more complicated and a lot more intricate to implement his policies than he thought?
It's a good question. I just published an article on my blog yesterday and on Steam called Steve Bannon's Secret Agent Man, which has gone kind of semi-viral on Twitter, much to my chagrin, because nothing I ever write on Twitter goes anywhere because Twitter actively squelches me. And they have for over almost a year now. And it's very obvious. And I'm not going to make any bones about it. They squelch me on Periscope as well. But I think that with Bannon being removed from the White House, and he removed himself from the White House, I truly believe that when he's back in Breitbart, why would they – this is another 15-minute conversation. Why would Trump and Bannon announce this at the worst possible time, the most inopportune time? Bannon, supposedly the white supremacist who runs Breitbart, is fired 3 days after Charlottesville, a day before Boston. Why? Even though he quit 2 weeks ago. Why did they wait 2 weeks? And the thesis at this point is that the only thing that fits the facts is that Dana Rohrabacher is coming back from Europe with information from Julian Assange, having met with Julian Assange for the first time, with an American official from the U.S. government for the first time in 5 years, finally met with Julian Assange. Now, Rohrabacher is a Trump loyalist. Okay, he's one of the few American legislators that Ron Paul likes, that Ron Paul respects, especially on foreign policy. And Rohrabacher is one of the few people in Congress, like Tulsi Gabbard, to say we should not be fomenting a new Cold War with the Russians. We should not be in Syria, that kind of thing. Rohrabacher's, from that perspective, Rohrabacher's a very good man. And for him to go over and speak to Julian Assange, you have to ask yourself the question, why, and why now, and what's going on? If Trump needs to get control and reverse the current trend, he needs to have absolutely explosive information to take a lot of people down. Now, to answer yourself the other question, why has Julian Assange held back most of Vault 7? Why has he held back most of what he's found in the DNC leak emails and everything else? Why have we only gotten snippets of this? Why have we only gotten tastes of this? And I'll tell you why. It's because the man wants a pardon. He wants his life back. And I would, too. If I was sitting in the Ecuadorian embassy, having not gotten sunlight for 5 years, if you looked at Julian Assange, the man is white. He's whiter than your shirt. And it scares me to look, and he hasn't seen his children. His children have grown up without him. He wants his life back. And he's not going to get his life back if most of the power brokers in Washington aren't neutered, indicted, or in jail. And if he's got the goods to get them indicted, well, then he and Trump need to, there needs to be a deal between him and Trump that he can get pardoned and know that when they shoot at these people, they hit their mark. And I'm talking specifically now about Hillary Clinton, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's probably going to go to jail anyway over the Iwan brothers. They've already been indicted. I'm thinking Chuck Schumer. I'm thinking John McCain. I'm thinking all of them. They're all involved at some level and Obama, to have created a fake dossier about Trump, to get a FISA warrant to wiretap him during last year's campaign. All of that is espionage. All of that is colluding with a foreign power to destabilize our government. It's all high treason. They should all be, if Assange can prove that, they should all be strung up by their toenails over the Washington reflecting pool and fed to dogs as traitors. Period. There's no doubt in my mind, right? And if that's the case, Julian Assange is not stepping 1 foot out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London without Hillary Clinton, clapped in irons. I just don't see it, right? And so Steve Bannon being removed from the White House, putting him back in Breitbart with a private line to Donald Trump, Breitbart's going to be the source of all the real information. Bypassing the Washington Post, bypassing the New York Times, bypassing all of them. If I'm correct about this, and Trump hasn't gone full war hawk. Now, at the same time I published that, 24 hours later I published an article on Russia Insider, which is currently the lead article on Russia Insider right now, saying, with Bannon gone, is Trump going to go full war hawk? I don't know. You asked the question. These are your opposite scenarios. He's surrounded by military men. He's surrounded by neocons. He's surrounded by all of Bill Kristol's, all the people that Bill Kristol at the Weekly Standard would want him to be surrounded by. And the question is he doing it? Is he going to start doing that? Is his hatred of China and their trade policies so strong that he's willing to restart the war in Afghanistan to keep Central Asia chaotic, so that China's Belt and Road Initiative falls apart, right? We've already removed the Pakistani PM, Prime Minister, Sharif. So, there's a lot going on, and these are big issues. And I know you wanted to talk about running a hobby farm this morning, but this is really what I do. This is what I do today. This is what I do for a living, and this is how I make my daily bread. The rest of it but I'm able to do that because of the decisions I made previous to this will allow me to have the time to be able to do the research necessary to get this done.
Well, that's all right, because this channel is all about, kind of like red pilling people, really. So people know what's happening and they prepare themselves mentally,
Right.
emotionally, physically, spiritually, etc. They can then lead a remarkable lifestyle, not to be
Bingo.
like one of the masses. And speaking of the masses, you talked about how it only took 3% of population to red pill everyone else to form a tipping point. 3% of the American population to start the revolution back in the day. And that's not the case. Well, you say 15-20% now are people with guns, and 300 million guns in the States. So, do you think that for all these things like the arrest, the treasonous people to be arrested, and Hillary to be in ironclads, that it takes an educated public, or an unbiased subjective media and people that are very well educated.
It takes all of that, and we don't have that right now. As a matter of fact, we have an Orwellian superstate in the media that that is obviously all of the major networks are controlled by either corporate interest or factions within the U.S. Government intelligence community. The Washington Post is well known to be a CIA house organ, right? And Google and Apple are enforcing their version of free speech. I mean, they have control of the mobile internet. Arguably, they own it, and they're enforcing their ideological purity test on who is and who is not allowed to speak on their networks, and who is and who is not allowed to make a living through this kind of through this work. Even though these people have made their business on the backbone of publicly funded infrastructure expropriated through tax money. Now, again, I'm an anarcho-capitalist, but as far as I'm concerned, if you've made your business, we don't live in Ancapistan. We don't live in an anarchic world. We live in this horrible, repressive, tyrannical world. Well, in this horrible, repressive, tyrannical world, why is it that we broke up Standard Oil, but we're not going to break up Google? Why did we break up Microsoft in 1997? Why do antitrust work against Microsoft in the late 90s, and Apple and Google are allowed to, basically run the mobile internet without any regulation and not abide by federal communication standards and interstate commerce and all these other things that we have tons of legal precedent for. I don't agree with that legal precedent, but it's here and these are the rules. So as far as I'm concerned, Google and Apple both need to be regulated as public utilities until further notice, until new technologies can come to the forefront, which are happening right now, and competing technologies like Steam and Gab, which is going to go full blockchain with a system very similar to Steam's, to get around this, right? But even so, most people interact with the internet through their phone. If you can't get an iOS app if you can't get your app onto iOS, you've been cut out of 40%, 45% of the U.S. population because Apple owns 45% of the mobile market in the U.S. or 40 to 45%. I haven't looked up the numbers in a year or two, but I'm sure it's still around. I'm sure Apple's market share is still well above 40%, and Apple has complete control over what goes into their store. Gab will never have an app on the iOS store. Period. Not as long as Tim Cook is running the company. Not as long as Tim Cook is running the company. Tim Cook has given $1 million to the Southern Law Poverty Center, one of the most radical left-wing terrorist organizations in this country. I mean, as far as their rhetoric is concerned, these people are a hate group. They just hate white people. So, this is where we are. This is the life. This is the world we're living in right now, and something has to give. And if they continue down this path, it's going to be civil war in the United States. I'm telling you, Adrian, it's going to be civil war. There's no other outcome at this point.
Yes, I remember hearing that phrase, American Civil War, back as 2008 or 7 or 9, when I used to listen a lot to Michael Savage back in the day.
Yeah. Well, Savage was right, but just early.
And
I'm the same way. I never listened to Savage because I always thought I just never liked Michael Savage very much. I appreciate him, but I don't like him. Savage is a savvy political analyst, but he was early, and and I was early back in 2008 as well.
Yeah, I remember just hearing it and not understanding it at all. It's like, where are you getting this? Where are you getting this from? That I believe you, but I can't imagine it. Just no context for it. And Gab, isn't that the blockchain equivalent of Twitter?
No, it's not. Well, it's not a blockchain equivalent of Twitter yet. Gab was built by a bunch of guys who bunch of former Silicon Valley guys who got thrown off of Twitter, and we're watching guys getting thrown off of Twitter en masse during the election last year. So they built Twitter. They built a Twitter equivalent in no time flat, and so Twitter has no comparative advantages, Adrian. As a company, it has no comparative advantages. It's the next MySpace. They can't make any money. They have no business model. They can't make any money. All they can do is continue to burn through their Saudi benefactor, their Saudi investors' money, and every couple of years cram down some more some more rounds of financing until somebody else finally buys it. Kind of like Microsoft buying LinkedIn. LinkedIn never made any money either. It still doesn't make any money. And that was a terrible acquisition as well. But that's Microsoft. They're known that's like their raison d'etre. Hey, we're good at bad acquisitions. Them and HP. So though the Twitter, so Gab was kind of the home of the, they want to paint it as home of the alt-right or whatnot, but it's just dedicated formally to free speech. Now, lefties don't like going over there because they can't be because their opponents can't be filtered, right? So is it a bit of an echo chamber? Sure, it's an echo chamber, but that's going to be the way things are as we go along here. We're going to subdivide. We already are subdividing into echo chambers. What Apple and Google and Reddit and even to a lesser extent Patreon and the rest of them want is complete control over not only what information you get, but what products you buy, whether or not you're allowed to have and know whether or not who you are, so that they can decide whether or not you deserve to have a business or not, whether you deserve to be remarkable or not. And that's the part that's absolutely and utterly insane, and it needs to be, and an end run needs to be done around it. And that's when you look at a guy like Dan Larimer, who created BitShares and Steam and now EOS. You look at if you watch any interviews with him, you understand that this guy is driven to take these people down. Andrew Torba, who's the CEO of Gab, is driven to take these people down and to fight them with every ounce of his being. And I was an early proponent of Gab. I've been on there for from the beginning, since beta. It's a fine platform, and it's a far better platform for content creators than Twitter is. But it's still young, and it's still got a lot to do. They just raised $1 million on Start Engine, the maximum they were allowed, and they'll raise more. But they also just announced that they're doing an initial coin offering. They're going to do an Ethereum-based tipping system that's going to look I would imagine, looks a lot like Steam, right? Where you can upvote and re-Steam and content creators can get paid through the issuance of cryptocurrency tokens, and then those can trade on the open market. And I think that is a way that is absolutely the best model for democratizing information. And then we can see what happened with like DTube. I don't know if you saw the DTube project on Steam. This guy out of nowhere, one guy replaced YouTube. 2 months worth of work, and he replaced YouTube. And it's a system, for the people who don't know what DTube is, he put a video storage and distribution system on the Steam blockchain so that you can post your videos there. They're stored somewhere else. He takes a cut of the Steam reward pool fees on your posts to pay for the storage of your video. Done. Who needs Google? Why do we need Google at this point? Steam is already going to. I already saw the systems like Steam. From the moment I got on Steam, I realized that Steam was going to turn YouTube into a wasteland of servers, where people will be serving their videos that they're posting on other services. Well, YouTube demonetizes them. Fine, I'm monetizing my stuff over here on Steam. I don't need you. I don't need your advertisers. I don't need any of this stuff. You can go scratch. Content will find itself. What I need is a search engine. Fine, I'll pay you for search results, but I won't pay you for YouTube. We're gonna hang you with server and streaming fees on YouTube. That's what I want to do.
Yes, I've heard about Gab, and after this little talk, I must jump back onto it, see how I can incorporate it into what I'm doing.
Sure.
And DTube.video, I heard about it 3 or 4 days ago, something like that, after the post had been online for 7 or something days. My problem with it now is that when I upload my videos, this podcast and videos in general, they don't upload. They just keep saying uploading. The screenshot uploads. I can add the tags in and all the rest, but it just never seems to fully upload. And
I've gotten them uploaded. I would not go with very big videos. I don't know about your bandwidth. I know my bandwidth is kind of out here where I live. I don't have great up speed bandwidth, so I just my stuff, I encode it like 640 by 480 and nothing more than that. And then because, high definition is going to take forever to upload and probably get done. I see people doing it. I've done it once or twice, but I've used the service a couple of times. But even so, at this point, it started last week. Give him 3 months, to improve the protocol, to improve the system, and improve the code, and understand that these things are all in. This is effectively alpha level code that is already generating great traffic. I'm not saying that the tool is perfect at this point, but it's like everything else that's being built. Now, all of this stuff is new. It's not that DTube is great. It's that what DTube represents is what's great, which is when YouTube starts censoring content and deleting 10 years worth of people's posts, like Lee Stranahan's, the former investigative journalist for Breitbart, now works for Sputnik and other people, and as an independent journalist, he just had his YouTube account just deleted. 10 years worth of videos deleted. Not you don't get money anymore, or no, your account is gone and you've been deleted. You've been erased from history. Your history is gone.
Yeah, I thought that would be a case of DTube just too early. It's very young, but I wanted to be there from day one, day 5
Sure.
in this case. But I'm going to have to wait a little bit, but we'll see. Certainly Gab will investigate that furthermore. And
absolutely, Gab is much better than it was when I first got onto it. I mean, they do curated topics, right? So to help congregate traffic, they've got a Gab TV is still in its infancy, but they've got a streaming service now where you can go live if you're a pro user for $6 a month. I'm a member of Gab Pro. The system is still wonky. They're under constant DDoS attack. They were down last night for like 6 hours. Since the market realized, since the powers that be realized that Gab is now a competitor, they're trying to crush it before it ever gets out the door. And the more they do that, the worse it's going to be. Google took their app off the Google Play Store on Thursday night. By the end of Friday, Gab's had 25,000 new accounts on a network that only had 215,000 at that point. So they moved up. They expanded 10% in a day. Okay, that kind of thing, that kind of new influx of people coming in and servers overloaded and the powers that be striking back. That's just before we went live, I said, hey, hold on for a second, I got to finish this tweet, and it was a tweet to the powers that be at Gab saying, hey, if you're not being attacked, you're doing it wrong. Once you have their attention, that's when you know you're doing it right, and that's why I know that it was important to start squelching certain voices on Twitter very early on, and that's fine because they don't. I mean, the people I used to be involved with, the real hardcore always Trumpers, the best, the shills for Trump. I'm not interested in that. I'm a very skeptical Trump supporter. I'm a libertarian, and I'm a geopolitical analyst, and frankly, expert. And I know when Trump's making mistakes, and I know when he's doing the right thing, and I know when he's making mistakes. And I'm going to just give you the unvarnished truth that whenever, however I see it. And sometimes I may be, overstating my case, but that's fine. It's the way things are. Going to the heart of some of these geopolitical matters will get you, a black mark. It will keep you from finding your audience. And, Steam has been a godsend for me, and we'll continue to. But there's still ways around it anyway. There's still ways of getting around them because humans are infinitely more. If there's a theme for this particular episode, is that humans are infinitely more creative than they are repressive, and we will always find a way to be remarkable, to be creative, and find solutions around their problems. Every government or corporate intervention into a marketplace in order to preserve their rent-seeking behavior, and I mean that in a rent-seeking, I mean in economic terms, it means unearned wealth
rentier economy.
Yeah, the rentier economy. That their rent-seeking behavior, and what Google and Apple are engaging in, is absolutely rent-seeking behavior, no different than your typical government bureaucrat. The more that they engage in those kinds of practices, the more they drive the real economy underground. They create quote-unquote black markets, and they create their own competition that will eventually take them down. and that's the creative destructionism of which is a hallmark of the free market economy. And it's why it's beautiful, and it's why it's great, and it's why Antifa is going to wind up dead in the streets if they're not careful.
Interesting. And speaking of Sputnik earlier, John McAfee was on Russia Today recently talking about, or maybe a few months ago, I'm not too sure, talking about his tweet that he made near the end of last year or a few months ago about Bitcoin going from 1,800 to over 500,000. And Russia Today wanted to know what his thoughts about that was in regards to the bubble, what they called the bubble. What do you think about Bitcoin and the blockchain technology and the price of it?
I think the blockchain is going to change the world. I think
agree.
that everyone that has, everyone that is trying to, that everybody that wants an anarchic, an anarchic world, they want anarchic versions of our current systems, right? Those systems are being built right now, okay? And the blockchain will give you the opportunity to do that. And the governments that fight it are going to be left behind, and the governments that embrace it are going to be the future. This is why why I'm a bull on Russia and a bear on the United States in the long term. In the long run, Putin has made it abundantly clear that he gets it now, having spoken to Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum. And we're seeing I've seen no less than 4 or 5 major announcements connected either connected to directly or 1 degree of separation from the Russian government, talking about the implementation of blockchain technology into very important parts of the Russian economy, the banking system, the stock market, creating a master chain. I think it's called master chain to create to obviate the need for like things like notary publics and all of this stuff for issuing permits and transferring property and all this stuff that all these things that the government's supposed to do. It's one of the few things that government's supposed to do well, which is kind of manage all of our manage the records of all our contracts, right? And they'd even do that badly, because if you've ever been to a property appraiser's office, you've ever done a title search for because my wife is a surveyor's, has in the past was a surveyor's assistant. So if you've ever done a title search or a property search, it's like the government records are awful. They're terrible, which is why everybody has to have title insurance every time they flip a house every 20 minutes. It doesn't matter that I bought the house yesterday. I'm going to sell it today for another $20,000 in a housing bubble. There still has to be a new title insurance policy written every time, because the government records are terrible. The same thing with government water supply. We talk about all these things. They just do it badly, even though that's all we really ask them to do, and we spend all this money on it, and they can't even do that stuff right. So all that stuff's going to get all that stuff's going to become bulletproof, corruption proof. The big thing is that you depower the basic petty bureaucrats, the property appraisers and the inspectors and the clerks who won't give you a permit simply because it's my lunch break. The hell with you. Or I want 5 kopecks for processing your permit, even though the fee is X. I mean, there's that kind of petty corruption is still rampant in Russia. Everybody knows it, and Putin's trying to get rid of it. And it's rampant in the United States as well. I don't care what anybody says. It's rampant here as well. So, the big one is that we can put all of voting on the blockchain. This is the one thing that no one is talking about, but everybody should be talking about. There's absolutely zero reason why we should ever punch anything into another Diebold machine. Pardon my French. You put us all on the friggin' blockchain. You'll give us all a unique identifier and an account, and 1 person, 1 vote on the blockchain, auditable. If you want to make it anonymous, fine. Then we include Monero's ring signature system so that all the votes are still privatized, and everybody knows that they're privatized, and the code is public, and the records are public of who voted for whom. But we can strip out the identifying headers easily. All that information can be stripped out, and I'm sure that 4 or 5 dedicated blockchain engineers would be happy to write that code for the United States government, hand it to them next week, and get it done, and you'll never see it happen. Why? Because voter fraud is part of how they keep the system running. I saw something the other day that the United States has 3.5 million more registered voters than they have voting age adults. Most of them are in California. which calls into question all the idea about Hillary won the popular vote and all this stuff. The hell with you.
Yes, so. I think I saw that article recently as well, just briefly somewhere. And you mentioned something about Antifa earlier, dead in the street or dead in the water. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. And you'll notice that Antifa is never congregating in any place which has a stand your ground law. The United States, some of the states in this union, thanks to my home state of Florida, this is one of the things I can truly be proud of coming out of Florida, is that we are the progenitors of the stand your ground law, which is the effective way to say that, look, if you're in fear for your life, you have the right to shoot somebody.
So I never heard that law, but how do you justify that in terms of in a court?
It's very simple, because you have a castle doctrine in your property right, as in both your person and your property. We do not have a duty to retreat in Florida. There's a duty to retreat if somebody breaks into your house in New York, you have a duty to retreat and I'm sure that that's the way it is in England. We do not have a duty to retreat in Florida. We have absolutely the right. If somebody comes in through our front door, we have the right to shoot them. Period. And absolutely. We don't have a right to shoot them in the back if they're running away. Okay? If they break through the door, see me with a shotgun, and I turn around and go, that's a bad idea, homie. You might want to turn around and leave. If he turns around and leave, I don't have a right to shoot him then, obviously. But we have a stand your ground law in Florida. If you are attacked with someone with intent to do grievous bodily harm, and it's defined, and there's a definition of the limit, and brandishing a wrench, holding a wrench up your sleeve of your black black hoodie to whack me over the head with, I got news for you. That's allowable. We are allowed to shoot in Florida. We are allowed to use deadly force in response to that. You are brandishing a weapon. No, we can take you down. You'll note they're not here. They won't come to Florida. They won't come to the other 11 states that have a stand your ground law as well. They know better. They only go to places where they control the governor or the mayor or wherever. That's where they go. And that's all designed from Soros and the Clintons and everybody else. I mean, Charlottesville was a setup in the beginning, Adrian, right? Terry McAuliffe is a longtime ally of the Clintons. He practically made the Clinton presidency. He ran the DNC during the Clinton presidency and for years after that. Now he's the governor of Virginia. Okay, he's a friend of the mayor of Charlottesville who pushed through the city council the removal of the statue, which created the impetus for the quote unquote white supremacist rally. There's a lot of discussion as to whether or not the people on the quote unquote Nazi right that organized that rally aren't actually plants to create this. And then the whole setup itself, the way it was designed was designed to get everybody in there. McAuliffe then called for a state of emergency when nothing bad was happening, and then the Virginia State Police pushed the congregation into Antifa to foment a riot. It was all set up so that they could then push Trump into a position where he either had to disavow a portion of his base or be claimed to be a neo-Nazi sympathizer. Because at that point, then the Republicans can abandon him and they can try and impeach him for being a neo-Nazi, which is retarded and stupid and moronic, and it's not going to work. But it's what it was what it was designed for. And then Bannon being thrown out of the White House 3 days later. Think about it. So they knew what was coming in Charlottesville. They understood that it was a setup. Donald Trump knows the Clintons. He knows what they're capable of. He's known them for years. It's part of the reason why he ran for president. He ran for president because he knows that Hillary Clinton is evil. Okay? It's why he ran. He's known them for years. Right. So that's why Steve Bannon held back his resignation for 2 weeks, which was to create the best optics possible on it for Trump.
Fascinating. And as we begin to wrap up this podcast, Tom, I didn't know about the stand your ground law in general, and I'm assuming that's also legal and that's law when you're in the public as well, in the streets?
Yeah, it is. You have a right. You have it's the stand your ground law, and I'm no legal expert, but I understand, as I understand it, in Florida, you have a right to defend yourself with deadly force if you are threatened, which is why George Zimmerman, at the end of the day, was acquitted from Trayvon Martin. It's why he was acquitted. The stand your ground law. Now, did Zimmerman go out of his way? Was Zimmerman a racist? Probably. Was he unstable? Probably. Or they're all. Did he go out and foment the confrontation with Trayvon Martin? That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not gonna. I'm it seems like that's possible, and certainly that's one of those edge cases where you have the situation where the law becomes an issue. I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in. I believe all laws are dangerous and stupid, but I can tell you that this is the law as it stands, and this is the situation. And so you're going to have the law never gets it 100% right because it can't possibly get it 100% right. It's not possible for any law to get all cases 100% right. So, but this is why Zimmerman was acquitted, right? And ultimately, and it's where we are. We have the right in Florida to use deadly force. I have the right in Florida if somebody comes at me with a knife for me to put my foot into a solar plexus and then knock him out. I'm practically a black belt in Taekwondo. I can kill anybody that I want to if they come at me. And I have news for you: if somebody attacks me with a knife, I probably will. Before I realize what's happened, I probably will kill the guy. And this is part of the reason why in self-defense, the first thing you learn is to never put yourself in a situation where you would ever have to defend yourself. The part of the self-defense mindset in this, and again, this goes back to why we live where we live, why we built the house, why we live the way we do. Talking, if I'm pushed, it's like James Mattis. I come in peace, but sincerely, with tears in my eyes. If you screw with me, I'm going to kill you. You know what I mean? But otherwise, hi, I'm Tom. Let's have a great conversation. Let's have a great life together. But you screw with me. You screw with my daughter. I'm sorry. I'm Italian. It's the way it's going to be, and that's the way most people are. When you push them far enough, that's what they're going to do. And and the situation that is happening with Antifa is George Soros and company are very obviously stoking these kids to a level of violence that is irrational, and it's going to wind up with people doing the wrong thing. And so if you know you have a tendency to overreact, you don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to overreact, right? So that's what I do. This is why I spend most of my days in my home, talking about this stuff, but never, doing it. But at the end of the day, you have to be prepared emotionally, mentally, physically to defend yourself. And that means not just financially, not just emotionally in terms of the macro sense, but also, at the end of the day, to defend yourself and or somebody else from somebody being violently attacked. It's your duty it's your duty to your community. And it's your duty to your family. I don't know if you have children or not, but but my attitude towards all of this changed the day my daughter was born. And the news to you, I've talked to, and every father I've ever talked to says the same thing. Because you have no idea that change that happens the moment your child is born. Your life is no longer your own, and you're willing to do anything imaginable to defend that child. Period. And that's just the way it is. So.
Yeah, no, I don't have any children. No. Fascinating talk. Fascinating in general.
I know I know that some of this is uncomfortable, right?
No.
I'm not saying it. And in some ways, I know this is kind of uncomfortable, but it's just the truth. This is the way humans are, and we don't want to get to that point. Ultimately, what I'm talking about here is that we do not want to be in that emotional state where that's where our default reaction should be. That's not what's going to get this done. Diplomacy is always the right. Talking to people and diplomacy is always, always, always the right course of action. So when I get angry with Trump for foreign policy wise, it's when diplomacy is not allowed to work. It's when he doesn't allow his diplomats to do their job, right? And that's what scares me about there being that many military guys in his inner circle right now. Is that how much balance does he have in terms of wanting to use diplomacy? Now Trump is a negotiator; he's a businessman, and but he's also, psychologically, he's also a bit of a bully. It could be a little scary.
Yeah, no, not uncomfortable at all. Just fascinating insights, fascinating conversation, and expanding comfort zone a little bit, and
Right.
it's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But as we wrap up this conversation, though, because I know you've got to go,
Right.
what is the best way for the audience to get in touch with you?
The best way for the audience to get in touch with me is you can find me on Twitter or Gab at TFL1728, or you can check out my blog at tomluongo.me. That's TOMLUONGO.me. You can just look up Gold Goats and Guns pretty much anywhere, because the name of my blog is Gold Goats and Guns, and you'll find that if you do a search for that on the evil Google or DuckDuckGo or Bing or whatever search engine you decide to use, you'll find me from there. I'm also on Periscope, and I'm also on Steam as Gold Goats and Guns.
Cool. Well, Tom, I'll include those in the video description, in the show notes.
I appreciate it, Adrian. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great having you on the show again.
Thank you. It was real. It was a blast. I enjoyed it.
That's the whole point. So, ladies and gentlemen at home, if you haven't already, click on the subscribe button below and press the bell notification right next to it for the latest uploads. And if you're watching this on Steemit, give it an upvote, re-Steam, but most importantly, follow, because there's plenty more content and podcasts to come. Because this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. And in fact, I think I might change it ever so slightly to fit with what I'm doing, so to become a remarkable individual, or to become remarkable in general. So subscribe, there's plenty more to come, because you need to go out there today and do something remarkable.